Welcome back to Foresight Radio, where we dive deep into the technologies shaping our world and explore how they're redefining the way we work, live, and lead. I'm Tom Kalopoulos, and today we're going to take a deep dive into what has been termed by many the new Cold War, fueled by the nation-state race for AI dominance. However, we're taking a somewhat different approach to our podcast by inviting Google's Notebook LM to join us and take the lead in the narrative. Notebook LM is a pretty amazing and unique application of large language model AI. It not only parses and understands a body of text that you feed it, that you train it on, for example, an article or a book, but then it goes on to carry out a conversation on the topic with these two synthetic AI podcasters who engage in this back and forth discussion with natural banter interruptions and even casual asides like, uh-huh, or wow. And as you'll see, this isn't a monotone text-to-speech readout. It mimics the cadence and the rapport that you'd expect of real humans who are interacting with each other, complete with enthusiasm and personality and even an element of surprise. Dare I say, with some serious chemistry between the podcasters. Because of the way the two synthetic podcasters interact, some people have confused Notebook LM with a category of AI called GANs, or Generative Adversarial Networks. These are AI models where one component of the AI challenges the other using synthetic data, such as false images. And it does that to improve the quality of the final output of the AI. So by way of example here, imagine that you're in a conversation with someone and you keep poking and prodding to improve the quality of the facts that they're presenting. Notebook LM does that in a way, but it's not adversarial in the GAN sense. It's adversarial in spirit. The two hosts debate each other, they dissect the content, and they make it much more engaging as a result. The actual category of AI that Notebook LM falls under is called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. It's getting a lot of popularity lately. It's a subcategory of AI where it actually takes the information that it's been trained on and creates responses that are based on the user-provided data rather than just a general corpus of information. The retrieval part is pulling info from that particular upload that you've trained it on. And the generation part is then crafting something like this podcast. And this keeps it focused and factual and relative to the source that you've provided it with, distinguishing it from the kind of freewheeling chatbots that are trained on a large corpus of information. The dual host twist also adds a creative layer to RAG, making it much more than just a Q&A tool. But we'll take it one step further. We're going to use Notebook LM's interactive capability, which is in beta. And that it's going to let me join in on the conversation with the two synthetic podcasters as sort of a call-in listener might do on a talk show. For this episode, I trained Notebook LM on a very specific article, which we'll post here, that I wrote on the new Cold War with my co-author of Gigatrends, Nathaniel Palmer. And this was based on some of the recent news about DeepSeek and R1 and what it was doing. And that obviously raised a lot of nation-state concerns around AI. So we'll start with Notebook LM, and then I'll jump in a few times periodically just to ask questions to see how well the podcasters, the synthetic podcasters, actually take this information in the article and provide engaging and relevant responses. Ready? Here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another complex topic.
Definitely. Always up for a challenge.
Right. So today we're going to be examining the potential for a new Cold War. But this time, not one focused on military might, but on artificial intelligence.
Interesting.
Yeah, AI. It's a pretty complex topic, as you can imagine.
It is?
And to guide us through this deep dive, we have excerpts from Arms to Algorithms, Is AI the Next Cold War? By Thomas Kalopoulos and Nathaniel Palmer.
Okay.
So one of the things that immediately grabbed my attention in this article was the way the authors describe AI as a new kind of battle way. Not a physical one, of course, but the digital landscape where nations are competing for technological dominance.
Yeah, the authors make a really compelling case for that. They argue that the real battle isn't going to be fought with tanks and missiles, but with algorithms and data.
Right, exactly. And speaking of data, one of the most striking analogies in the article is the comparison of data to oil. They call it the new oil of the 21st century.
Yeah, that's a powerful image.
It is. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, you know how oil has been this incredibly valuable resource shaping global politics for over a century. Control over oil reserves, distribution networks, it all translates into immense economic and political power.
Right. It's been a source of conflict and cooperation, alliances and rivalries.
Exactly. Now imagine that same dynamic, but with data. Whoever controls the flow and processing of data, especially through AI, potentially holds the keys to influencing everything from financial markets or healthcare systems to public opinion.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
Oh, hey, I think our listeners got something to say.
Hey, that's a very insightful comment about data being the new oil. But one of the things that strikes me is that there's a difference here. Oil was a commodity. 1 gallon of gasoline that I had, I would trade for a gallon of gas that you had. But data is not a commodity. Data is very personalized to the individual, the organization, the nation. How does that play into this role of data being the fuel for this new Cold War?
That's a fantastic point. What's fascinating here is that the value isn't in the individual data points themselves.
Right. It's in the aggregate. It's in the ability to collect, analyze, and interpret massive data sets to identify patterns, predict trends, and ultimately gain an advantage.
Exactly. And that advantage can be economic, political, or even military. Think about targeted advertising. It relies on collecting and analyzing data about individual preferences to influence consumer behavior.
Or consider how governments might use data to monitor populations, predict social unrest, or even wage cyber warfare.
And that's where the Cold War aspect really comes into play. It's not just about who has the most data, but who has the best algorithms and infrastructure to process that data and extract meaningful insights.
So it's not about barrels of oil, but about the sophistication of the refineries and the pipelines and the distribution networks.
Precisely. The ability to refine raw data into actionable intelligence, that's the real source of power in this new landscape. And as we'll see, that raises all sorts of concerns about global fragmentation and the potential for incompatible AI systems.
So essentially the concern is that instead of one interconnected digital world, we end up with multiple incompatible systems, standards, even different values embedded in these technologies.
And the article goes on to highlight this really interesting example, DeepSeek R1. It's a Chinese open source large language model designed to be cost effective and aligned with national objective.
I was fascinated by that. It seems to point to a fundamental difference in approach between the West and China when it comes to AI development.
Definitely. While the West often prioritizes innovation and, at least in theory, ethical considerations,
China seems to have a much more strategic focus, prioritizing national goals and control.
Yeah, and that raises a crucial question. Will AI not only fragment us technologically, but also reflect and amplify these different values and priorities of the nations that created it?
Right. It's like we're not just talking about different gadgets or software, but about different versions of the future being shaped by these technologies.
Exactly. And let's hear it.
So, fascinating conversation. However, one of the things that strikes me is that the Cold War was fought on national ideologies. We're talking about a Cold War here that is coming down to large technology players who are defining the rules of the game. And they're not driven by ideology necessarily the way that nations were with the Cold War of the 60s and 70s. How does that play into this conversation?
It's a really insightful question. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here is the shift in power dynamics.
Yeah, in the classic Cold War, nations were the primary players.
Driven by ideologies and geopolitical ambitions. That's a very insightful observation. What's fascinating here is how the nature of power has evolved.
Yeah. It's not just about governments and ideologies anymore.
Exactly. Now we're talking about these massive tech companies wielding incredible influence.
They control the platforms, the data, and the algorithms.
And to your point, their motivations aren't always ideological. They are driven by market share, innovation, and profit.
So how do their motivations factor into this new Cold War scenario?
Well, it becomes a much more complex game. These companies, they aren't necessarily bound by national borders or traditional alliances.
So their interests might not always align perfectly with those of their own countries.
Precisely. And that creates opportunities for collaboration across borders, but also potential conflicts of interest.
It's almost like we're entering a new era of geopolitics where these tech giants are major players alongside nation states.
Exactly. And that raises all sorts of questions about accountability, regulation, and how we ensure these powerful entities are acting in the best interests of society.
It's not just about treaties regulating weapons, but maybe about some international body regulating these tech companies.
It's a fascinating point to consider.
This makes the idea of AI arms control treaties even more complicated.
Yeah. treaties, non-proliferation agreements, all aimed at preventing catastrophic consequences.
But with AI, we're only just beginning to grapple with those questions of control.
And also oversight and accountability.
And the stakes seem even higher. Oh yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, so along these lines, we're talking about governance when it comes to AI. One way to provide governance is through regulation, but the reality is that AI is moving much too fast for any regulatory body to really keep on top of it. We can't legislate quickly enough to deal with AI. So is the answer having AI govern itself? And what will that look like? Will the AI in the US somehow provide governance that's different from the AI in China? And will that differ from some other part of the world? Is it possible to have one set of governance structures when you have such conflicting interests across the world when it comes to developing AI?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question.
It's an excellent point about the speed of AI development.
So regulation struggling to keep pace.
What's fascinating here is the idea of AI governing itself.
Almost like embedding ethical principles directly into the AI.
But then that raises all sorts of questions about whose values are embedded.
And who gets to decide?
Exactly. Will we end up with competing AI governance systems?
Reflecting the different values and priorities of different regions?
Yeah. The AI in the US might prioritize individual rights and freedoms.
While the AI in China might emphasize social harmony and stability.
And is it even possible to have a single universal set of governance structures?
When there are such fundamental disagreements about values,
Maybe the answer lies in a multi-layered approach,
where some aspects of AI governance are handled globally.
while others are left to individual nations or regions,
But that also requires a certain degree of trust and cooperation.
which, as we've been discussing, is far from guaranteed.
It's a bit like the Wild West right now, isn't it?
It is, and that's why it's so important to start these conversations.
One thing the article mentions is global agreements,
Global agreements governing AI development and deployment.
but it also speaks about countries collaborating.
And what ethical frameworks AIs should use. Hey, yeah, what's up?
So are there actually some global policies or regulations in place or in a formative stage that will provide the sort of governance that you were just talking about?
That's a great question.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
There are definitely initiatives underway.
The article touches on a couple.
The OECD's AI principles, for example.
Those are intended to guide responsible AI.
And UNESCO has an AI ethics framework.
These are steps in the right direction,
But they are more like guidelines, not binding laws.
so they might lack teeth in some way.
Exactly. And that raises a key question.
Can we rely on voluntary measures alone?
Or do we need more formal regulations?
Something with actual enforcement mechanisms.
And the challenge, as you pointed out, is speed.
How do you regulate something evolving so rapidly?
How to keep up while fostering innovation.
Striking that balance is incredibly difficult.
One approach is to focus on specific applications.
Regulating high-risk uses of AI first,
Areas like healthcare and finance.
where the potential for harm is greatest.
Another idea is regulatory sandboxes.
Creating safe spaces for AI development
Testing new technologies in a controlled environment.
before they're widely deployed.
The EU is working on comprehensive AI legislation.
It aims to set global standards.
We'll have to see how that plays out.
It faces a lot of pushback, too.
And what about international cooperation?
What you were asking about a little while back.
Can countries agree on common AI standards?
It's a tough question.
But the alternative, as we've discussed, is bleak.
A world of fragmented, incompatible AI systems.
So while there aren't fully formed global policies,
There's definitely a movement in that direction.
then the conversation is gaining momentum.
Creating ethical and trusted AI should be a key aspect.
So the West setting radical standards and transparency,
But also investing in cybersecurity is critical.
and recognizing how some problems demand collaboration.
Ultimately, navigating this needs strong leadership.
And we can't forget how STEM education plays a role.
So, will AI unite or divide humanity?
Those are some considerations along these lines.
Think about this. Oh, go for it.
It seems to me that we're at a bit of a crossroads here, aren't we? Where in these formative early days of AI, we can make some decisions around transparency and the potential benefit that AI has if we collaborate over the downside that it would have in becoming more of a divisive force in the world, something we didn't do in the Cold War with nuclear weapons, where we were not at all transparent, and that led to enormous escalation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really powerful analogy to the Cold War.
This connects back to earlier concerns about an arms race.
Yeah, where the pursuit of technological superiority,
Can overshadow ethical considerations,
transparency is key, and a really great point.
because without it, we risk repeating history.
The potential for escalation, for mistrust, is massive.
And that brings us to the idea of collaboration.
If countries work together on AI, they can avoid pitfalls.
We're more likely to develop AI that benefits everyone.
It's about finding common ground, building trust.
But as we've said, there will be some hurdles.
Now that we've really tackled that question, what's next?
The article brings up the Stargate project.
It's a massive joint venture between OpenAI and others.
It exemplifies this blurring of private sector and national strategy.
These companies are working together to advance AI.
But their interests may not always align with any one nation.
So it's a much more complex landscape than the old Cold War.
We need to consider the motivations of these tech giants.
We need to consider how they interact with governments.
And also international organizations.
It's a multipolar world, which may be a good thing.
Power is distributed among many different actors.
The authors warn that the urgency to deploy AI
may lead to compromising privacy in the process.
It's a sobering thought, this rush for dominance.
And it bypasses ethics, just as you mentioned.
Especially when AI is no longer just a tool.
We're not just talking about preventing nuclear war,
but about shaping our societies and our lives.
AI has the potential to be far more pervasive, in fact.
So we're facing a unique set of challenges with AI,
requiring us to think differently about its role.
And speaking of unique challenges, here's another one.
One of the biggest challenges is resources poured into AI.
The article talks about the opportunity cost, too.
Think about all the brilliant minds focused on this competition.
Instead of addressing the most pressing issues, like climate change,
like global inequality, things we've been discussing,
it makes you wonder if we're putting our best foot forward.
The authors suggest that this could become a zero-sum game.
Instead of progress, we risk weaponizing advancements.
And as we've discussed, that's a major cause for concern.
So it seems we're facing this daunting set of challenges.
The potential for an AI arms race that's consuming resources.
And this risk of sacrificing those ethical principles.
The authors do suggest some ways forward, though.
One of the most promising ideas is global agreements.
Like arms control treaties, but regulating algorithms?
Precisely. Setting a framework for AI development.
Establishing norms, standards, and safeguards.
Like a kind of rule for the road for the AI age.
The article mentions the OECD's AI principles.
Those are big starting points, for sure.
But we need to go further, address its societal impact.
Those agreements, they would have to cover ground.
Data sovereignty would be key, as you noted earlier.
Ensuring individuals have control over their data.
We need transparency, explainability in AI systems.
We can't just trust black boxes to make decisions.
We need mechanisms for international cooperation.
So that we can move away from competition with one another.
Recognizing the potential for AI to do a lot of good. Yep, go on.
So we had a great conversation. I've really enjoyed your analysis, but could you bring it all home and give us a very simple takeaway from what is a very complex problem that's going to have a long road ahead of it? What's a simple takeaway that's hopeful that we can keep in mind as we move forward?
Absolutely, that's a great question to keep in mind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
the simplest, most hopeful takeaway I see is this.
That the future of AI is not predetermined.
Yeah, it's not set in stone.
It's something that we actively shape through our choices.
So what does this all mean?
That we have agency in the matter.
So we need to choose wisely.
Now, with that in mind, we need to be cooperative.
The authors even suggest U.S.-China cooperation.
That collaboration could yield pretty tangible benefits.
All while fostering a spirit that's more cooperative.
Realistically, there are some pretty big geopolitical hurdles.
There are.
And leadership is what it all comes down to.
Leaders who understand AI, who can build bridges.
That brings us back to the importance of education.
We need to be investing in STEM education.
And supporting a society equipped to have thoughtful discussions.
The article ends on a note of cautious optimism.
We have the knowledge, the tools, the capacity.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not bystanders.
The future isn't predetermined. It's something we create.
We create together. The authors suggest that we have a choice to make here.
Do you let AI divide us or unite us as one human race?
It's a question we've grappled with many times before.
Nuclear weapons, the space race, and the internet.
They all presented both opportunities and also risks.
And our engagement shaped what kind of impact they had.
With AI, though, the stakes are really even higher.
As we said, it can reshape our world.
This deep dive has really been a journey for us all.
Thank you for joining us on this really deep dive.
And again, thank you for that very insightful question.
As always, we hope to hear from you next time around.
Until then, keep thinking critically about AI.
And above all else, please stay very curious.
Goodbye to our special listener.
Yes, goodbye.
And that wraps up our discussion on the topic of AI.
Thanks for lending your expertise to our discussion.
Certainly a very complex topic, but very important.
And we look forward to continuing this conversation next time.
Now, while that wasn't flawless, it was pretty amazing, wasn't it, in how it unpacked the content of the article and also created a pretty cogent set of responses to the questions and comments that I was posing. Stop and think, about how we are currently in the very early days of AI, and yet how capable AI already is to be able to do something like what you just heard. Now try to imagine where that might lead us in just the next 5 years. We are clearly at the threshold of an incredible era of innovation and discovery. Thanks for listening. If you're enjoying Foresight Radio, be sure to subscribe and share it with friends and colleagues. The best way to navigate the future is to keep asking questions, embracing change, and seeking out new perspectives. Until next time, I'm Tom Kalopoulos. As always, stay curious.